Good morning to all of you and welcome to the regular UNMIS press conference. And let me also welcome everyone joining us live on Radio Mariah across the country. The press conference is part of our commitment to provide regular updates to the media and to the people of South Sudan on our assessment of the current situation of the country and what UNMIS is doing under our mandate. Let me begin by acknowledging some positive developments over the last 3 months. The government-led Joint Task Force for the implementation of constitution making and electoral processes, along with the AU and IGAD and UN participation, is now up and running. There have been multi-party discussions on the budget for the elections. The National Elections Act is under consideration by Parliament, and the police have begun conversations around security during the elections. I'd want to commend the recent public remarks by the President during the 12th Independence Day celebrations and the Martyrs' Day that acknowledged, firstly, that this is a critical phase in the consolidation of peace. He reinforced the message not to return to war, and he endorsed the path forward to the elections in 2024 on time and without further extensions of the roadmap. Time is of the essence. Only 17 months remain on the roadmap timelines before elections in 2024. I repeat what I had said at an earlier press conference, that 2023 is a make or break year, such that the decisions and actions that must be made now have to be made in order to pave the way for the holding of peaceful, inclusive and credible elections next year. The candid and honest observation of most analysts, observers and stakeholders is that as it stands today, South Sudan is not yet ready for elections, but that elections could be held on schedule if there's adequate political will, a practical approach to the arrangements, and commensurate resources are applied to achieving the benchmarks in the roadmap. Let me emphasize that elections are not a one-day event, but a process that involves deliberate and thoughtful actions before, well before, during, and after the electoral process. The process must have the full confidence of the South Sudanese people to make it a nation-building, not a divisive or violent activity. It begins with laying the right foundation for the legal framework of elections through multi-party deliberations in Parliament. This means critical decisions about the type and format of elections, how many elections will be held, questions on the census, on voter registration, on the inclusion of refugees and IDPs, as well as the establishment of relevant bodies and legal structures that can address elections-related disputes, must all be taken now. The reconstitution of 3 essential bodies I'd want to underline, that's the National Constitutional Review Commission, the National Elections Commission, and the Political Parties Council, must be prioritised. These, what we call foundational tasks, also encompass the drafting of the new constitution, where the parties must reach consensus on the constitutional provisions and have realistic expectations on what can be done in the remaining time and within existing resource constraints. A stable security situation is non-negotiable. Ongoing questions on the transitional security arrangements must be addressed urgently, particularly the ranking of the middle echelons of the uniformed forces and the training and deployment of the necessary of those forces. We hope that the promises that we've heard regarding these developments, that they are imminent and that they will shortly be resolved, we hope that these promises are kept. Additionally, creating a conducive political and civic environment is required for all political parties, civil society groups, the media, and all South Sudanese. All must have confidence and guarantees that they can exercise their liberties without fear, including to freely express their views, present different opinions, and engage in debate on the political and constitutional choices facing the nation. Simply holding elections is not enough. The credibility, transparency, and inclusivity of the process is what brings legitimacy. This includes that political parties must be able to register and campaign freely, and there must be a civil society that will serve as an extended arm for civic education and act as an observer watchdog of the process. It includes a media that can report on the process and give space to the variety of voices and opinions for voters to make informed choices. In our consultations with civil society, including youth, women, and persons with disabilities, all have agreed that marginalised groups should be included in the electoral process and guaranteed representation in the legislature, including the 35% for women and a proposal for reserved seats for youth and people with disabilities. For our part, UNMIS is currently supporting the transitional government in the constitution-making process and the planning for elections. At the request of the government, UNMIS, the African Union, and IGAD have presented a list of immediate priority decisions related to elections which need to be taken by the parties to the peace agreement. These key decisions are anticipated to be put forward to the political parties and the Council of Ministers for consideration. Let me talk now a little bit to the Sudan crisis. Part of my job as the head of the UN in South Sudan is to ensure that the interests of South Sudanese people are kept on the international agenda and in the focus of our international partners. In my briefing with the Security Council in New York and in my engagements with regional and international partners, I continue to remind all that although we must keep a close watch on what is happening in Sudan, it would be a mistake to take our eyes off the ball in South Sudan. The war in Sudan dominates regional and global attention, while South Sudan bears the brunt of at least some of the crisis. Food prices have increased, reducing the ability of vulnerable households to access food to meet basic requirements, while reduced cross-border trade has led to localized scarcity of food commodities. With over, as of latest count, 201,000 entrants recorded at present, the overwhelming majority of which, as you're aware, are South Sudanese. The humanitarian community in South Sudan has called for urgent funding, including an immediate need of $26.4 million to be able to provide transportation until the end of the year for the tens of thousands of people fleeing the Sudan conflict. Without onward transportation available, there's the risk of more congestion in and around the border towns where humanitarian services are already overstretched. The congestion and increased competition over scarce resources could exacerbate existing intercommunal tensions between the returnees and host communities and between some of the returnee communities. And this needs to be averted. UNMIS has intensified its patrols and reinforced its presence in Rink to mitigate and prevent any outbreak of violence. We'd want to commend the government of South Sudan for keeping its borders open and call on authorities to mobilize the additional resources to support the returnees and refugees. The mission also commends humanitarian actors for their continued engagement and reiterates the call for additional support from national, regional, and international partners to help bridge the funding gap. The situation in Sudan serves as a wake-up call for all of us in South Sudan. It reinforces the imperative to move swiftly in strengthening the foundations for peace, stability, and inclusive governance. We remain concerned about the situation in and around Malakal. It remains fragile following the clashes at the protection of civilian site in early June. Our forces tried to respond as quickly as they could in a densely populated camp of 45,000 IDPs in a conflict involving two sets of armed youth militias, but which nonetheless saw the tragic loss of 17 lives. We want to acknowledge the support of the humanitarian community and the state authorities that was received by the UNMISS in managing to restore law and order, and in the aftermath as the force extracted 51 persons trapped in the POC and sought life-saving medical attention for a further 28 persons. We've deployed additional peacekeepers to strengthen security in and around the area, carried out, even as we speak, cordon and search operations in the POC sites for weapons, and within our means we'll do whatever it takes to protect civilians. An internal after-action review of the events in the Malakal POC site is near completion. We're treating this as an opportunity to adapt to changing circumstances and consider how we can improve our ability to contain violence. In this regard, I acknowledge the effective cooperation we've been having from the Governor of Upper Nile State, the South Sudan People's Defence Forces and the South Sudan National Police Service and the National Security Service in restoring calm and maintaining security. The mission continues to appeal to all communities to exercise maximum restraint, and we urge the local and state authorities to address and mitigate any potential flashpoints. Intercommunal violence continues to claim lives as the country grapples with political and economic issues, as well as the effects of climatic shocks, including drought and floods, and recently, in the Greater Peebo administrative areas, rumours of mobilisation have led to an influx of people into Peebo following an attack along the Nanam River. UNMISS has dispatched patrols to Likangole and other places to monitor the situation and help avert further violence, and I'm happy to report that the immediate threat appears to have dissipated, at least the immediate threat in Yongre and the Peebo administrative area. But cattle-related and general violence in the tri-states of Unity, Warrap and Lake States have resulted in the deaths of an alarming number of people. Friction due to the presence of cattle herders fleeing the conflict in Sudan, or between settled communities and migrant cattle keepers in parts of western and eastern Equatoria and central Equatoria, adds to the growing tensions and potentially negative consequences for the lives and property of ordinary South Sudanese citizens. We continue to condemn this violence and advocate for solutions. Last year we jointly organised the National Livestock Conference, which delivered some important recommendations for this sector. And I wish to call on the governors, the Transitional Government of National Unity and other stakeholders to take the recommendations forward so as to challenge the practice of cattle raiding and migration-related violence. My friends, South Sudan needs to urgently complete the transitional period of the revitalised peace agreement so as to guarantee the foundation for peace and sustainable development in the hands of South Sudanese. My assessment from interactions with regional and international partners here and outside suggests the need within South Sudan to deepen the trust between communities, to build common purpose and a shared vision of the future. I believe there will be an international willingness to support the peace process and the elections if there are demonstrable actions by the principal stakeholders in those elections and the creation of the right frameworks to allow for the receipt of such assistance. But key decisions about electoral, constitutional and security structures must be made urgently, and these decisions do not require special additional financial resources. Success in this area will persuade donors and international partners that a peaceful and secure South Sudan is a viable place for investment and support. I want to assure the people of South Sudan that the United Nations family remain committed to supporting them and to working with other regional and international partners towards peace, security and prosperity in South Sudan. Thank you for listening. I'll now take a few questions.